All right, today we're going to talk about American reinforcements or supplies for Ukraine and what they can be used for. I'm Pelle, I'm a military historian, and it's a while since you've seen me last because there's not been much to say. And if I'm a bit distracted at times, it's because I'm walking in, as I usually do when I make these videos. And I have been wrong before. I would have thought that we in the West would not have asked the Ukrainians something that we would not do without the right and proper equipment, without giving them the right and proper equipment. But we asked them to do something that was basically impossible. We should have given them the F-16s and mine-clearing equipment a long time ago. But that was one thing I was wrong about. I also thought that it would have been better to launch the counter-offensive where the front sort of bends from an east-west line to a north-south line, just south of Donetsk. There wasn't that many fortifications there. Where it was launched was basically the strongest fortified area of the front. And it was signaled very strongly that the Ukrainians want to go to Melitopol, so the Russians knew. That was, in my opinion, a mistake. But my thoughts then was, well, Zaluzhny has done much better than I probably could. That's why I'm a history teacher, and he's the superior commander of Ukrainian forces. And he knows the situation on the ground. So that's what I thought, and I was wrong. We don't know if I would have been, if my recommendation would have worked either, because they still didn't have the right equipment. So there is that. I'm not always right, but I would suggest that looking at history can provide us with examples of what the Ukrainians can do. But let's first see another place we're wrong. This is impromptu. I was also wrong about America's aid to Ukraine. I did not know that the Speaker of the House, well, I might have known that the Speaker of the House had so much power, but I didn't connect the dots. And I did not know that he could block aid all on his own for so long. And that has cost the Ukrainians dearly. It really has. US is turning to the Pacific and inwards. It doesn't seem to give a shit about us Europeans any longer. So we should have started our own arms productions 2 years ago and not relied on the arsenal of democracy. They are no longer the arsenal of democracy. They're the arsenal of the US. Anyways, the aid will arrive. Much of it is already in Poland and Germany. So I would be very surprised if some of it is not already on its way across the borders. Because I don't know any US service members in Europe that does not sympathize with Ukraine and really, really, really want them to win and want to give them all the tools they need to win. But winning has become harder in the last 7 months while we were waiting for US aid, and we Europeans did nothing because we couldn't. With empties are basically emptied everything we had. Except we Danes, we had 24 more F-16s that we could give, but the US forced us to sell them to Argentina. Another example of why the US does not give a toss about Europe anymore, or at least only a very little toss. Anyway, what I would suggest the Ukrainians do is what is known as a feigned retreat. And it hasn't been done in modern times that I can think of. It might have. I don't know everything. But it was common in the Middle Ages and antiquity. It is what the Parthians did to Crassus and whipped him. It is what Mongols, Huns, Parthians, other basically horse-based cultures would do. It is also possibly what William the Conqueror did at Hastings. There's no certainty whether it was a feigned retreat or it was actually a collapse of his front line that got turned. Anyways, that's not the point. I would advise the Ukrainians, if I were them, it's risky, because they could just shore up their front and continue to attrit the Russians and go for their oil infrastructure. But the thing is, Russians can endure a lot of hardship they seem to be proud of it. They seem to like it. There's some sort of masochist nature in them. I don't know. But that's what it seems from history and from what we look at now. They can endure a lot. And that's also why Ukrainians cannot win the war militarily. They might be able to kick the Russians out of Ukraine, though the chances of that has fallen over the last 7 months because of Mike Johnson and the MAGA. But what's to stop them from continuing to attack across the border? Nothing, really. So the war can only end if the Putin regime collapses. What can make the Putin regime collapse? Well, not hardships for the Russian people, that's almost certain. And from the start, I have said it would require a serious military defeat. And we saw cracks a year ago with Prigozhin. We basically saw cracks in the regime because they were suffering military defeats, or had suffered military defeats over the winter. And I'd said from the start that a large military defeat, or at least 1 million dead. And that's a long way yet. That's a long way yet. So we need to find out how can we basically defeat them militarily, and a feigned retreat would be good for that. Basically collapse part of the front. The Russians want to push forward. They have been inching forwards meter by meter over the past 6-8 months. Suffered incredible losses, but they're still pushing forwards. And when you have a 5 to or 10 to 1 superiority in artillery, that's a given. It's a given that nothing can hold back that much artillery. 70% of the losses in this war is artillery. So they want to push forward, so collapse a part of the front, or at least pretend to collapse a part of the front, like the Soviet Union did in 1942 against Fall Blau, where they did an orderly retreat and basically stretched out the German lines. It's really hard though, because at some point you have to stop running and turn around and fight. But that's where I would suggest that you would gather a lot of reserves, 30 to 50 kilometers behind the lines, where the drones have a hard time spotting them. Because drones is an unknown in this, and what makes it even more risky. And then let the shoulders hold, because as Patton, and Patton is overrated as fuck. He was a mediocre general, but not bad, but he was overrated. But sometimes he was right. And when he said about the Germans, let's, in the Battle of the Bulge, or Wacht am Rhein, he said, let's have the guts to let them go all the way to Paris, so we can cut them off at the shoulders and crush them. He was right. And the Ukrainians should do something like that. Not all the way to Kiev, but collapse the front of Chasiv Yar or somewhere like it, where the Russians really, really, really want to attack, and then have new defensive positions 30 to 50 kilometers back, where drones can't spot them. Lots of artillery reserves, lots of shells stocked, whatever armor and IFVs can be gathered, and then stop them, crush their offensive, the front edge, the spearhead of the offensive, and then hit them at the shoulders. Because Russians are really, really good at defending if they have time to prepare. I built this on von Melentin's analysis from World War II, and from what I've seen in this war, it fits. It fits very well. He said that when Russians have time to prepare and dig in, they're almost impossible to dislodge. You might as well not try. But if you surprise them, then they run. My interpretation of this is, of course they do, because Russian soldiers are not allowed initiative. Russian lower officers are not allowed initiative. Everything comes from above, because in a dictatorship like Russia is, and the Soviet Union was, the dictator fears his generals, and the generals fear their colonels, and etc., etc. Everybody fears the guy below him, so you don't let him think for himself. You also fear the guy above you, so you don't let your lower commanders think for themselves and maybe mess things up for you. So if we hit the Russians, or Ukrainians hit the Russians by surprise, they might be able to make a pocket like the Falaise pocket, which the Falaise pocket was a result of Cobra, but it was more a result of the Germans trying to cut off Cobra with Operation Lüttich, or like the Manstein's counteroffensive at Kharkiv in early 1943, or indeed Operation Saturn against Stalingrad, where the Germans were so stretched out that they couldn't hold the front. Something like that would be my advice. And what I would say, if Syrski has the guts to try it, they can win. If not, it will be a long, long, long war with frozen front lines. We may even end up with a Korea situation. And apart from Puccini and the Muscovites, American MAGA is to blame for that. So screw you, American MAGA. Anyways, that was my thoughts on the matter. They should collapse a part of the front, make a feigned retreat, and then crush that offensive. I mean, look at videos of the Falaise Gap, or footage from Manstein crushing the Red Army spearhead at Kharkiv, or from Stalingrad. I've said it now, and I thus reserve the right to later say, I told you so, or why didn't they? But have a nice day. It's spring, even though it's raining. Well, a little bit.